Like, how do we actually get it on the computer?
Okay. So I'm going to start recording now, and then later when we're finished, I'll be able to post the file someplace and send you the link, send everyone the link so they can watch.
Great.
So
You'd like for all of us to.
I have an exercise set up, and it's based on a series of reference photos I created about 4 or 5 years ago with a neighbor um, who used to be a professional figure skater. He's now a modern languages teacher. Used to be a neighbor, but he's since moved away. But he's probably been the best model I've ever had, just because of his profession as a figure skater. He could hold incredible poses for a long period of time. So anyway, okay, here goes. So I'm going to share my screen. I'll show you what I'm going to do. I guess the first part, I call this pre-production. It's a stage where I begin with a raw photo that I like. I make some of the changes that I want. I figure out what the best dimensions are. Usually that's based on the panels that I have available. And then what I want to produce is a color version, a black and white version, a version with the armature, a version with the grid. And then I'll usually play around with the exposure because sometimes the figure is so dark, I'll miss elements. So I'll overexpose it so I can see more of the details. And then sometimes I'll do the reverse because often with photos, the highlights are blown out and you miss some of the details in the face. And then there's another exercise I do. It's called blurring and posterizing an image. And that way I can see how many values are at play. I can simplify a complex image to maybe 11 values that match the value scale that we use. And that's enormously helpful if you're doing something that's an odd shape like a sphere and you're wondering, how am I going to paint this? Posterizing the image lets you see some artificial boundaries where the planes change. So these are all the things I do as a batch. And then I have what I do what I call post-production at the end when I photographed my artwork, and there's always something wrong with it. Usually it's the first problem is with perspective, distortion with the lens. So I'll use a tool to recrop and get the proportions right. And then I'll do some touch-ups, which usually means covering up the edges of the painting where I might not have finished right to the edges, or the camera has picked up dust and particles, or there might be a glare, and I'll do all those things just to get a better image that I can post online or send out for competition. So what I'm going to do is show you the image that I began with, the raw image, what happens in Photoshop first when you open up a raw image. And in case if you don't know what that means, it's an image that hasn't been processed by your camera or your phone. And it is possible to, with an iPhone, to choose, or my iPhone at least, iPhone 12, to choose a raw image when I'm taking photos. And that gives me a full range of options to manipulate the image. So let's get started. There we go, sharing the screen.
Ellen, may I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
Do you use the monthly subscription to Photoshop?
I do, yes, I do. And I'm on the beta program, so I have a version of Photoshop that gets updated regularly with new features, and then I can try them out before they're rolled into the main product. So that's kind of fun as well. Years ago, when I was in the e-learning business doing multimedia, we would buy one version, and that would last just for a year or two, and then there'd be another version, and then they got rid of that and made it subscription only, which is painful. But it's one of those tools I use every day without a doubt. Can everyone see my screen at the moment? I'm working in Windows. I've got Windows Explorer open. I have some of the versions outputted already from a project that I worked on maybe 3 years ago. And what I have from my camera is I use a Nikon camera, so I have the raw image. So what I want to do is, let me go to Photoshop first. I'm going to get the right version up. Okay, this is the JPEG that my camera produced, as well as the raw image. So this is without any changes made. I know what I want to do is crop it. I want to change the lighting a little bit. A few other things I want to do with it. I'll show you how I work, and we'll get to the creating a grid and the armature as soon as we figure out the ideal dimensions. So let me show you then what happens when I open up the, let's see, I'll choose this one. When I open up the raw image in Photoshop, what it does automatically is it opens up the camera raw filter in Photoshop. And almost everything you see here, I know is available in my iPhone. I've got these options as well when I edit a photo. I don't know what the other phones are like, but many of these characteristics you'll see in your phone. There are things that I usually change automatically. I'll play with the exposure. I'll check the contrast a little bit, make adjustments to highlights and shadows, whites and blacks. One of the ways I do that efficiently is to use something called a curve option, where I can just make minute changes to the curve here that affects highlights, lights, darks, and shadows. Another thing I'll be looking at would be color temperature. And depending on the room I'm in my house and the time of day, the colors can change dramatically. So sometimes I'll warm things up a bit. I rarely touch tint. I'll often play with vibrancy. And later on, I play with saturation as well. And then the final area that I tend to focus on would be the top three here: texture, clarity, and dehazing. Dehazing for me does something similar to what contrast does in the light area, I find. I use this dehazing option quite often when I'm photographing something in the studio and I have too much glare. So what I'll do is I'll change this setting, and I might play with the clarity. Here, clarity is something I'll use. Let's see if I want to see more detail or if I want to hide some of the detail. I use this quite often when I take a photo with my iPhone, because the iPhone is incredibly sharp, and sometimes I don't want that sharpness, especially if it's highlighting flaws in a finished painting. And in that case too, I might play with the texture as well. Sorry, just waiting for my dog to stop barking. Okay. Those are the elements that I play around with just to get started. So let's say I've got everything the way I want it. I'm going to click open. It applies those changes to that raw image. And now the next question is how to deal with cropping and what ratio I want my image to be. So there's a cropping tool in Photoshop. It works very similar to what you would have in your phones. But I do the cropping differently from the way that Richard showed us. And Photoshop is one of those tools where you can do things so many different ways, just an endless number of ways of accomplishing the same thing. But I thought I'd show you what I do. This is the crop tool in Photoshop. It lets me set a ratio, and it also gives me the option of whether or not I want to delete the area of the Photoshop of the image that I've cropped. I never turn this on because I usually have regrets about what I've made for a crop. So if you are using Photoshop, be sure that this is turned off, delete cropped pixels. Now, let's say you have, I know when I did this originally, I had a panel that was 30 by 20. So in the painting I did a couple of years ago, my dimensions were like this. But let's say today we've got a panel that is 20 by 16, or canvas, stretched canvas that's 20 by 16. So by doing it this way, I can kind of move this around. I can actually zoom in a bit more. I can move things around till I get the placement that I want. And there's a tool up here, an option up here. It's called an overlay. And by default, the overlay is rule of thirds. But sometimes I'll just play with these other options like diagonals to see where the diagonals are. And then I might say, oh, that's lining up nicely with the position of the arm. Or I might just move something here slightly so that these two diagonals meet, let's say at the top of the hand, and there's some wonderful alignment with that brush. So maybe that's a good thing to keep. So I'll play around that way. Sometimes if I have the right shape of a panel, I might play with the other dimensions here, golden ratio, golden spiral. So for example, if I had this painting set up a certain way and I wanted the eye to land, I don't know, let's say on the hand there, then I might change the dimensions of everything else just so that what we get is an image that draws the eye around and into that spot. So there are lots of options here, but what I tend to do is to stick with rule of thirds for simplicity. Now, maybe I'll crop it here. Maybe we'll go back just for a second, crop it here. You may have heard that with the latest Photoshop, they've introduced many more artificial intelligence tools, and one is called generative fill. It comes in many variations, but one that it's showing here now is generative expand. So let's say I wanted to look at, sorry, let's say I looked at my reference photo and I really regretted cutting off the photo, let's say at the end of the palette here, and I really, really regret that. And I say to myself, if only I had stepped back a little bit to give more room there. I just want to show you something quickly. I don't want to get too distracted by AI because it's a huge topic. But let's say I wanted to fill in some space here. And I know I could make it up on the canvas when I get around to the painting, but let's say I wanted to do something really quickly to resolve that. So what I might do first is expand the size of the canvas. So that's under image, and it was canvas size. And I'm going to give the painting or this area a little bit more width. I'll make it 3,000 pixels. And I'm going to anchor the right side so that the extra space is added to the left. Well, that's not very much. Let me see if I can do better than that. Okay, so sorry, image canvas size. And I'm going to change that to 3,300. And I'm going to anchor it, the image on the right side, so the expansion will happen on the left. Okay, there we go. Now, let's say we really wanted to fill that in, give more space around this side of the palette. Well, the way this tool works is I just have to select an area and I'll overlap with the existing photo. And it's changed the options now to generative fill. I'm just going to click on that. And here's where you would be typing in a prompt. And with a prompt, the prompt can be absolutely anything you can imagine, and then their engine reaches out to its database and tries to fill something in that makes sense. By leaving this blank, though, I'm not telling it what to do, except I'm indicating that I want it to use what's surrounding this rectangle and fill it in with something. So I'm going to click Generate. And a few seconds later, as soon as it's finished, it's going to give me 3 possibilities. So I'm just going to wait for that to finish chugging. Okay, there we go. So what's interesting to me about this, it must have recognized my Thomas More in the background. And my Holbein's Thomas More, and it's added a little bit more. It's extended the frame. It's added a bit more of the candelabra here, spacing this next light, same distance. It has done a good job of filling in that extra space. So what's cool about this is that I can now crop the image again. And if I decided, oops, if I had decided that I wanted to include more of the left side, there it is for me. It's available to use. So I just want to show you that as a possibility when cropping. But now I'm going to reverse what I did. I'm going to go back and take us back to, oops, sorry, I have to get out of this cancel. And I'm going to, there's a history tab, a very useful thing. I can step back in time. So I'm stepping back to the moment when I cropped this image for 20 by 16, although it reads here, in my mind, is 16 across and 20 high. The history panel is incredibly useful. It lets you step back as many times as you want from the moment that you open this. And I think about this often because some art societies allow photographs and digital art. And I always say to the organizers, well, as a fine artist, I don't have an undo button. I don't have a history panel. I can't undo my mistakes. So I'm always very resentful when digital art gets into a fine art exhibition. Anyway, let's say this is exactly what we want. We've got it's a ratio of 4 to 5, 8 to 10, or for our panel, we've got 16 across 20. Now, I want to, oops, I think I undid my crop. Just a second. Let me go one step further. Okay, there's my crop. Yeah, the history panel lets you go forward as well as backwards in time, which is terrific. Now, don't really like that placement. I'm just going to move my image up a little bit, got a bit of balance. Okay, so let's say this is what I want to stick with. So I want to create a couple of versions of this. I want a black and white version. I want the armature. I want a grid. I want to try a few other adjustments. I want to have one adjustment where I brighten things up so I can see the edge here. I want another version where I darken things so that I can see more of the structure of the face. So there's a couple things that I'll do. I think I have another version ready, so let me just move over to it. There's another panel here. Okay, here we go. So this is, I'll just uncheck some things. Just turn it back, and I have some other adjustments turned on. Okay. So here, let's say we're starting here. And with Photoshop, there's so many ways to change things. You can select a particular area. In this case, I know I did a selection where I selected the shirt and then I replaced the color. So you can replace the color on anything that you've selected. I can also determine that I want a darker background. And there are ways to do that as well. I've made one adjustment here where I selected the figure Scott, and then I inversed the selection to show us everything else. And then I applied an adjustment to darken the background. So that's how I came up with this. What else have I tried? I think this version here is where I made some adjustments already to camera raw filter. And that filter is always available under filter, camera raw filter. So I made some adjustments to, this is the original. I made a copy of the original. I applied some adjustments using the camera raw filter. Then what else did I do? I created a black and white version. And I'll go over to the other one I have open now so I can just show you how I did that. I can take us back. Okay, is this the one? No, I'm sorry. I have to keep track of all the versions I've got open here. Okay, yeah, this is the one. So if I want to create a black and white version of this, one quick way of doing that is going up to layer, new adjustment layer, hue saturation. And so it's creating a brand new layer. Then all I do is take the saturation down to 0. And I've got my black and white. And I can toggle that off and on to see the difference. Now, I talked about the armature. I talked about a grid. The armatures, I know Richard provided us with some files that we could import. With his examples, the armatures are in black, I think, black color. The ones I produce are usually in a bright neon color so that I can apply them to anything. And I'll show you exactly what I mean when I do that. I go to File, Place Embedded, and I already have prepared a series of armatures for different sizes of panels. So I have one for a 20 by 16 shape. So you can see with the neon, if I were to save this image now, I might use this for doing a quick poster study, and the armature will help me with placement. I might, before I crop, I might apply this. Instead of relying on the rule of thirds, I might apply this on top and then change my cropping just to maybe improve it. So let me show you how that might look. I go back to the crop tool. Because I haven't deleted the previous pixels, I should be able to move this around a bit. Now, oh, you know what? Right now it's not letting me see the armature. But let's say I made some changes, clicked OK, then turned the layer for the armature back on, and I could see if I made improvements or not. The only way I could do that cropping, I think, and seeing the armature at the same time would be to merge the armature here with the original layer. But since I have the armature there, let me see if I can realign the armature to the new crop. Okay, it's not perfect. I should be able to stretch things if I have to. But that's close enough. So let's say this is how we ended up. I do know with the version that I created, I think, I'm trying to remember now where my center line ended up being. I remember I wanted equal distance between the two elbows on each side. So I might have settled for something like this. Oh, sorry, I'm just going to admit Julie's arriving. So that's how I would do the armature. But if I was doing an armature from scratch, what I'd want to do is add some guides. So we've got a ruler along the side. I know I can add some guides for vertically and horizontally. And that can be quite painstaking to find the middle. But if I did know what the absolute middles are for each side, then I could start drawing with the brush tool. I could start drawing lines. But there's a more efficient way to do this, and this might get us to Pillar's question about drawing a grid. So let me just hide these guides. Now I also have, like Richard's armatures, I also have grids prepared for different sizes, and it's something I decided to do because it is time-taking to draw a grid. So I'll just show you one that I prepared for 20 by 16, a grid for 20 by 16. So there's my grid that's been, I guess, prepared a long time ago. I can change the opacity so it doesn't stick out as much. And I have to confirm that I want it placed there. So this might be a moment where I'd pause and I would export this image. Actually, let me step back. This is the original. I'd probably export this because it's the dimensions that I want, cropped the way I want. So I would export. Now I would go to File, Export, Export As. And I'd probably want the largest size I can manage. I would export at this point. I would turn on the layer for hue saturation. So we've got the black and white version. So I'd export that. I have the layer for the armature sitting on top of the layer for the saturation. That's a very, very strong neon green. So I'd probably take that down a bit to, let's say, 50, not too much. 50. Okay, and now if I export this image, I've got a version with the armature sitting on top. If I'm planning to do a grid on my panel, and by that I mean, if this is 16 by 20 on my panel, I would take my ruler and do square inches. I would, this could be very useful as well. And I might keep the armature visible as well. But let's say for Pillar's example, we need to do a grid from scratch. What I do first is I apply a guide layout. So that's under View, Guides, new guide layout. And it's going to come up with a default. Oh, God. Just by coincidence, I have a default set for 16 by 20. So it's giving me these squares. I didn't intend that. That's completely accidental. See, what you could do is if you had a panel that is, well, let's say the panel is 8 by 10, not 16 by 20. You could do 8 by 10. That'll give you a guide layout like this. If your panel was a different size, you could create a new guide layout matching what's required for that panel. And the idea is that one square here equals one square inch on your panel. Okay, let me go back to 16 by 20. And I think I will actually change this color to maybe yellow. Okay, so I click OK. I'm just going to recenter my image again. So we have a black and white, my black and white image. We've got a grid superimposed, and it's a grid I can toggle the visibility of. In Windows, it's Control semicolon turns this on and off. I guess it would be Command semicolon on a Mac. But with this thing visible, now what I would do to create my custom grid is I would add a brand new layer. I would go to the brush tool, and I've got a shortcut. The keystroke is B. So I've got, oops, give me the brush here. Okay, just a second. I've got that color selected. It should be, for some reason, I think I've got this. Oh, here we go. Next brusher tool. History brush tool. I've got some new things applied here, and I just want an ordinary brush. Here we go, up here. Okay, what I would do then, I would, in this brand new layer, I would start, see, it's followed my movements here. I would start drawing across horizontally, then vertically until I have my grid. I would turn off that guide layout and I would see what's happening underneath. Right away, I could tell that these lines going across for the grid are way too thick. So I would change the dimension of the brush, usually down to something like 7 or 8. I would turn the guide back on. I would continue drawing my guide. Oops, just do one, I'll do one more line. Turn off the guide layout. So there are the lines I want underneath here. And when I finish this, instead of having to replicate this again for a new project, for another 16 by 20 painting, what I would do is I would export the layer as a PNG file. So I'd click Export As, and I'd make the format PNG, which makes the background transparent. And then you have a grid that's ready to be imported for a future project. And that's what I did. I'll just delete this. That's what I did with this grid here. So I created that a long time ago. I've imported it using File, Place Embedded, and there's my grid. So I would, at this point, I would export this black and white image with the grid. Sometimes I'll export the color image with the grid. But you can see that if I had made the grid black or dark gray, it would be very hard to see when I have the black and white version turned on. Are there any questions at this point before I forge ahead?
Thanks, Alan. That's great.
I was wondering. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, just one question. I'm just wanting to confirm, when you're going to crop a photo, and you don't want it to be relative to anything, you just want to crop a certain portion of the bottom or the top.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Would you put that under like, because that's what I get always is the proportional cropping rather than just one straight area.
Okay, well,
where would you do that?
Yeah, I'll go back to the original image here.
Mm-hmm.
So by default, with the crop tool, it wants to impose a ratio. And the way to get rid of that is simply clicking the clear button. And now that it's clear, I can make this do whatever I want it to do. Whoops.
Okay, thanks. So simple, and
Yeah.
it's been driving me
Well,
nuts.
I want to show you how useful that can be, because if I'm working on a portrait, apologize for my screen is flittering back and forth. It must be short on memory. Let me just close one of my programs here. Close all tabs. Sorry, I'm just going to try and get more memory. Let's cancel that for a second. Okay, what I want to show you is if I decide to, sorry, I'm getting some memory issues on my laptop here. Well, I have another file prepared, but let's say I wanted to focus on the head and do some things with the head. So I might just create my own crop for the head, create a brand new file. And I happen to have a brand new file ready here. Let me step back. So this is something else I wanted to show you, just some extra steps. So in addition to all the versions I told you about, the black and white and the version with the armature and the grid, let's say I decide to focus on a head or hands, and I want to see if I can find where the planes are for painting this. And I know with our studies with Patricia, we can mark out, just draw on here where the planes are. But I have another way of doing that. The first step is to apply a blur to this image. I made a copy of this image, which is just the head. And I applied a blur to it. This is found under filter, blur, and you choose Gaussian blur, then you choose the severity or intensity of the blur. Then I create a layer to desaturate the image. So we've got black and white. And then I do something that's called posterizing the image. And the reason I want to do that is I want to reduce the range of values, and I just want to see where the boundaries are between different values. So I believe it's under image. Oh, sorry, it's under layer. Let me see, just a second. Just getting back to my notes here. So new adjustment layer. So layer, new adjustment layer, posterize. I already have a layer created, but when you do this, I guess there's a default setting here. Let me just bring that up. So I'm going to choose another layer and turn that on, so I know that. I'm just looking for the settings, posterize settings. So okay, just a second. It's supposed to be giving me the options here, I think. Oh yeah, there we go.
Oh, right there.
Yeah. So what this represents here is 11 values, and I chose 11 because that's essentially our value scale from absolute black to absolute absolute white. Sorry, I'm just going to see, trying to figure out why I can't get the options to become visible. I've got too many things open here. Oh, here we go. It's my believe it or not, my Zoom tool was covering up the dialog for properties for posterizing. So let me show you up top here. Can you see this right now? It's a tab called properties. It's showing that I'm on the posterize adjustment. If you wanted to see what your image is like, oh, sorry. Somehow I turned on crop. Just a second. Cancel. Okay, I don't want to crop. I'm on posterize. I'm just going to move my thing around a bit. Okay, so I'm on posterize. Come on, mouse. Oh, I have to turn it on. Okay. I think it was last year we talked about this. There are various tools you can put on your iPad or mobile phone to see values of your reference images from 2 to whatever. So Photoshop has this as well, this posterize filter.
The
If
no
you're trying to figure out your composition again, this is still very useful. Let's say you've cropped it, but you still wonder, was it the best choice in terms of composition? But let's say I'm doing a head study, and I now want to see where the values change. If I choose 9, this gives us quite a good range of values, but you can see on the forehead how things are changing, and they can't say they exactly map the structure of the bones the way that they're outlined with the example we did for Patty. But I would find this very useful, especially if I were painting a sphere and I was trying to see where all those values are compressed in one particular area. Well, let's take the nose, for example. See all the changes, the tiny, tiny, tiny bands of value changing? That really, to me, is useful. I can figure out where the lightest light is supposed to be in that nose and then kind of paint accordingly. So I might take an image like this and export it. And this could be very helpful for the face, for the hands, anywhere where the objects are small and the values are changing pretty rapidly. Okay, let me just check the chat window in case I'm missing anything here. Yes,
Alan,
Shirley, right. Value study app. I have that too.
Alan, it to me, it seems so helpful because, everything is just so slight, especially in children and values. And this is like incredibly helpful.
Thank you. I think it is too. I find it especially useful for small objects, like fingers drive me nuts on a hand, but this is, for me, is helpful to divide the world. If not in 9 values, I can take it down to 4 as well.
Alan, can I ask you a quick question? What are
Sure.
you working on? I don't see what the name of this program is.
This is Photoshop, and this is
Okay, thank you.
I just happen to be in the beta version right now, so it's a monthly subscription. As I was saying at the start, this is a tool I use every day for many different reasons. So I'll use this for what I call pre-production, getting my reference photos ready before I start painting. And there's just so much you can do. I think Richard put it well a few weeks ago when he said you can easily do a deep dive into this program and just explore so many ways of doing things differently. I sometimes get lost in it, and then I'll do a tutorial, and then I'll figure out what's the best way to do something. Okay. So let me just get back on track for a moment. So this is I think the file that I had, I guess, 3 years ago. So let's see, if I start turning things on, you'll see some of the decisions I made. So here's here, I did this experiment earlier today. I did the expansion, but I did the expansion long after I had created a black and white version. So that's why you see a little strip in color here. What else did I do? Earlier today, I expanded this image, but the original was more like this, I guess. So there's my grid. But I did something more. I showed you the ordinary grid, but I also did something very different. I find if I have to make an exact copy, especially for a portrait commission, and someone's going to be incredibly picky about the finer details, I'll do more than just this grid of squares. I'll do diagonals as well. So here is I think this was 30 inches by 20 inches. So I had this grid. I created diagonals. I added these diagonals on my panel too. And then when I had to do the face, I think for this one, let's see if I can zoom in. So let me zoom in. Oh, way too much. Sorry, let me get this down to maybe 400. Okay, that's still, you can see what I did here with, I did diagonals in both directions. So within a square inch, I've got diagonals going in both directions. And that way, when I was working along and comparing my painting to this grid, I could see where my angles were off or my sizes of things were off. So this is someone who, if you had to be extremely, extremely careful about the drawing, this kind of exactness for one area might prove very, very useful. I think it would be overkill for what for the way Juliet works as an example. Let's see, just checking the chat again. All right. Okay, so this is another example. I would export this image. Later on, I'd photograph my work in progress. I might bring them both into Photoshop into one panel. I'd align them up perfectly, left side, right side, and then I could just glance back and forth to see what isn't quite right. And that's more about drawing issues than anything else. Okay, let me get out of this image. Go back to this other one I was working in. Okay. Okay, so I wanted to show you just a few other things. Let's see. Photoshop is really mainly about making selections and then applying changes to those selections, or let's say selecting something and removing everything else so that you can isolate something and you can make a collage with things that have been selected. You can do a lot of cutting and pasting. There's so many ways to dive into this, and I'd be happy to do it another time. But one thing I did to this image, I selected the shirt and then I replaced the colors. So let's say you were working on a subject, you didn't like the sky, you can replace the background. You can use their AI tool to generate a new sky for you. You can try different things out. You can select something, change any element of that, like the color, the values, the texture. In this case, I did a selection of the shirt. I changed the color of the shirt. But I also did something too. I selected the figure, and then I applied a change to the background so the figure wouldn't be selected. So let me just show you what that's like. Under select, if we had a landscape, we could tell it to select the sky. It would detect a sky. But here is select subject. It'll just take a moment to generate that. It's going to do a perfect selection of Scott. Now it might exclude the palette, but we'll see what happens. Okay, so that's a pretty good selection. I could expand it to include the rest of this. But here's how I might use this kind of tool. If you thought that your figure needed to be, let's say warmer, then what I would do is I could apply a level to it. Sorry, a layer to it, a special layer. I could make an adjustment. Let's see. Let's change the color for Scott. Let's make him. Let's see. Oh, still there? Still there. Just a second. Oh, I think I did something. I lost my selection. Just a second. Let me go back to my history panel. Okay, history panel is still there. Okay, select subject I've got. Okay. Should be able to see, where's my selection? Should be able to apply something directly to Scott. Just a second. I should be able to do something now that applies only to the selection. Did it work? No, I think it's, oh, I've got something else on top. That's why. Okay, just a second. Well, in any event, what happens is you can select something, you can apply any change to it. I did one earlier where I selected Scott and then I had it darken the background, but not Scott. And so this would be the equivalent of what Juliet does when she's reviewing our work and she picks up a brush in her Procreate tool and starts painting in the background to show us how things would look. But in addition to that, you can also apply things like there's a smudge tool, there's a blur tool. So something like that would be very, very, very specific You can apply it to an area and see the changes. So there's so much you can do, but I usually stop at a certain point and say, I'm gonna do something more playing around in a poster study or a quick thumbnail, or on those. I'm just thinking of the oil paper that she's advised us to use. I can do so much there, and it's like a permanent record I can have. So there's so much you can do. This is where I usually stop though, after I export all the images that I need. And I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I might do. I'm just going to look at my list here. Oh, yeah, here's just something, a quick demo. Let me just bring my layers up again. Let's just see. Oh yeah, so with the latest version of Photoshop, you can select anything and change it or have something done to it. So an example would be, I did this earlier. Let's say, so I'll just show you my example. Let's say there's an area that I want to change. And what I really want to do is get rid of this. Oh, just a second. So this is my selection here. Let's say I want to get rid of that. There's so many ways I can erase something. I've got a tool that's an eraser. It'll clone an area and I can use it like a paintbrush. So let me just show you what I mean. There's a tool here called the clone tool. Sorry, I think I'm losing some available memory on my laptop here. Just a moment. Okay, let me have to deselect this just a second. Okay, back to where I want to be. I'm going to go right down to my image. Let's say I want to erase this. There's so many ways I can do it. The old way that I learned was a tool called a stamp tool. And what it does is it makes a copy of an area. You select an area to copy. Oh, just a second. Hold on a minute. I just have to turn a few other things off here. And yeah, sorry, my screen seems to be running low on memory. Just a moment. I'm going to close a few other things down on my computer here. Just a second. Okay, I'm going to finish with this fellow. Yeah, my image is distorted for some reason. Just a second. Okay. Just going to see what else I can change. I'm going to just show you something quickly here before I close this file. I have a panel of values that I move from one project to another. And I'll export this with the black and white version. So if I'm doing the underpainting or something like that, I've got this to refer to. And each of these squares is perfectly calibrated to the Munsell values. So it's something I can rely on to insert into another image and use it from project to project. And I know I've got that visible here somewhere. Oh, here we go. So if I insert that into my image and I turn on saturation, then I can export this image and I've got this as a good reference. So on my palette, I'll often lay out my grayscale before I lay out my my chosen colors. And then this is for me a great reference going forward. So turn that off. This is something this is an image I could email to people as well if you're interested. If you're using an image program that lets you add additional layers, then this could be imported as.
Yes, thank you, Alan.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
it's very,
Yes, please.
Okay, so remind me about that. Turn this off. I think what I'm going to do is just close this image because it's distorted, and I'll just reopen it. There we go. Okay, that's better. All right, so I told you you can eliminate things you don't need, but often I don't really care about that work. If I was working on a reference of a landscape with a bunch of trees, I might eliminate some of the elements. If I needed to add something, then that's where this this generative tool is useful, but I wouldn't want to rely on it. I just want to show you what it's like. It's something that they released last year, and this is my screen. My memory isn't on my laptop is not helping me out here. But the idea is that you make a selection of an area where you want to add something. And just give me a moment here. I'll see if I can try again. Okay, once more. What I want to do is to make a selection. Okay. No. Okay, I don't have enough memory to do what I want to do. So I'm going to close a few things and see if that will help. I've explained him, so I'll remember to export this fellow later for you. So it'll be a PNG image that you can import into your files. Now, I can tell something isn't right with the memory here. Let's close this fellow. And just deselect. Okay, now let me try something else. All I'm trying to do is create a little box. Okay, no, it's not letting me draw where I want to draw, so there must be a memory issue. In any event, the way it works is you select an area, you type in a prompt, and for fun, I did this one. I just told it to give me a red hummingbird facing in profile, and that's what it came up with. It might be a useful tool to come up with ideas or play with ideas, but often the images they give you are so cartoonish within the Adobe suite of tools that they're not that useful. And what they also often miss is the texture or the bones of something underneath. And what I mean by that is, I can show you an example. I was working with an old family slide of a waterfalls, and I brought that into Photoshop, and I wanted to see if I could change the flow of the water over the rocks. So I selected an area. I told the tool to give me various variations, and everything it came up with was interesting in terms of water, but it had no sense of the structure of the rocks underneath. So the flow of the water made absolutely no sense. So that's where I find a limitation with these tools. All right. So let's see. If I do this another time, I can show you how I would make alterations like changing colors or isolating an area or removing an area or moving things out of the way. Very, very helpful if you have a reference photo of, let's say, a street scene and there's some overhead wires you want to get out of the way. This program is great for helping you see clearly without those obstructions. So it's really good about making selections and helping you remove the things that are distracting. So let me pause.
So Alan, sorry, a question. With that tool that you just mentioned, I just had in my imagination, would you then be able to change the head, say, of work, like let's say you have the image of the Mona Lisa and you want to bring in the head of your cousin?
Yep. Easily done.
So would you, and when you say it can't read the structure of the head of the Mona Lisa, so would that, or is that just basically an exchange where you crop something out, the head, you select the head, you crop it out, you bring in the other head? Or is that
it'll do a full replacement. And if it does it right, if we were to, well, let's try something. Let me go back. And I'm just going to reverse history. Let's see what happens if we try doing it with Scott here. I'm going to go right back to the beginning. Cancel that. Okay. Okay, let me just see. Let me just see if I can do a perfect selection of his head going back here. Oh, come on, stop. You know what? Let me just close this image. I'm gonna go back to, this is an image that I brought in. Oh, yeah, still have a memory issue. But what I would do, Pillars, is select Scott's head. And let me see if I can do this one more time. And I'm just going to close a few more things. So I really want to see if I can get this working. You know what I'm going to do is just close Photoshop, open it up again. And we'll see if it lets me start fresh. That might help just to clear some of the memory. Okay, so let's close it. Okay, and then we'll start it up again. Yeah, so what I would do for that process is I'd make a square around Scott's head and I would type a prompt saying, describing whatever I want to be replaced. And what it should be doing is giving me a head that takes into consideration the environment and the lighting. In theory.
And that's the AI aspect of it.
That's the AI aspect.
Okay.
So let me just take an ordinary picture. Okay. Bravo, I did it. So here it says generative fill. So I'm going to click on that. Head of Leonardo G. Okay, so I may not have left enough room, but let's see what happens. It'll give me 3 options, and then I can keep generating more and more by tweaking the text. Okay, that's obviously not right. But what else did it give us?
Can we see the 3?
Yep. So, so you see, I drew the head the square around the head too small, or the rectangle I chose for the selection was too small, right? So I don't know how it came
Wow.
up with these,
Wow.
but will it let me enlarge? Let's just see. Too large. So I might come up with something that's right.
That is incredible.
Yeah. So then what you'd have to do afterwards is just keep blending things until everything is working out.
So Scott, this beta version has the AI aspect. Is that because I ran Photoshop as well, but I don't see that option, but maybe I just
the
don't know
regular
to look
version
for it.
has it now too.
Oh, okay.
The live version, the production version has it now too. Yeah.
Alan, I have a old, it says Adobe Photoshop CC 2018. I don't think it's subscription on an older computer. It has most of this. I mean, obviously
Yes,
not the,
yeah.
right? And then my question that I put in the chat, and I know this is so simplistic compared to the advanced level thing, but how would we take like Richard's files, because I'm brand new to this, and just upload it into Photoshop and then create a file of our own armatures? Like, how will we do something that simple? Like just import his file and then create one in here.
Yeah. Give me a moment. I'll find his files and then we'll see what happens when we bring them in. What I did was I created mine manually into a separate layer. Then I exported those layers as a PNG with a transparent background, and then I can reuse them anywhere. Give me a moment. I'll just stop sharing for a second. I'm going to find
with the root 2 and the root 5, and all of the things that he taught. Love to to create some templates from those, but I just don't even know how to upload,
Yeah.
from somewhere else.
It's all about
Wow.
placing it's all about placing uh, the images. Now so he gave them to us as PNG. So I'll share my screen again now that I've found what I want. Just a second. So let's share a screen. Okay, I found the directory on my computer where I have his overlays. So he gave us a bunch of overlays, different sizes. So these are PNGs. That means when you bring them in, the background should be transparent. You'll be able to stretch them. You'll be able to rotate them, which is great. He's got a square one for us. Mine,
So PNG transparent.
yeah, that means that the backgrounds are transparent. And
Great.
he didn't have one for 20 times 16 or 16 times 20. So in my folder where I'm storing his files, I added my two as well. So let me just go over how I'll import them. I'm just saving the location on my computer. Okay, so let's see if we can do something with Leonardo here. I think first of all, I'd have to know that I want, well, let's see, what sizes did he give us? He gave us, let's say we're going to do 18 by 24. So let's go back to this. We're going to crop. We're going to make sure we get 18 by 24 in here. And then we're going to import his armature. I'm going to click this button here to reverse. So this is our 18 by 24. And I'm just going to reduce that a bit. Okay, so let's say this is our new Leonardo. I save my crop. So now we want to bring in Richard's armature. So I go File, Place Embedded, and this will create a brand new layer with his file. So let me get the location of that. 18 by 24, I think I said. And I'm going to place it. And right now it's the wrong way, so I should be able to rotate it, right? Yeah, I can rotate it.
It's just the files that are on your computer. It's not the files that you have in Photoshop.
Right. So all I'm doing is importing an image, which happens to be the armature. I'm placing it. And once I've placed it, what I can do is resize it. So what it has to do is an armature, it has to fit the corners of our cropped image. So let's just see, not quite there yet. Okay, so we've got Richard's armature. Let's see, I'm gonna just find where my layers are again. Okay. You know what, I'm just gonna take a moment just to change my workspace back to the default. There are different workspaces in Photoshop. Painting is the one that Richard uses, and I changed mine to match his weeks ago. I'm just gonna go back to the default called Essentials. So I just find it a bit cleaner. So on the right side, I've got my layers panel. So this is Richard's armature. And you see what I was saying before, that I find it hard to see all of the details of his armature because the lines are black. I'd like them to be something else. But we could make use of that, of the fact that it's there. Let's see, I'm going to lock that armature so I can't move it. I want to see now if I can change the positioning of things. Oh, Leonardo's head's going to move too. I'm just going to remove Leonardo for a moment. So we're back to Scott. I'm just going to, let's see, play around with this a little bit. Okay, so the armature isn't moving. I'll have to remove the armature, but I guess the way you might work is you'd study Richard's armature. You might see, where some of the key intersections are, and then, or actually, here's one. I think I just found one here. There's a bunch of lines that are meeting here. That happens to be a 1/3 point. So I might decide to crop right at that spot. Yeah, so I don't find this a very intuitive way of working. Um, I guess I tend to find the crop first that's most pleasing to me. Then I apply the armature, and then I try and see if there's some tweaking I can do to make things look a little bit better. But I find with Richards, I'm having trouble seeing where all of these go. So I would likely change the color of this armature or bring in my own with the neon colors and then play around a little bit.
How would you store it in a file? Because I know that in his Photoshop, he has a file in Photoshop that has his armatures. Like if we wanted to create a file of armatures that we create, oh, this,
Well,
it's in here.
yeah, remember he gave us a bunch of things to download. So these are all individual PNG files, just as images.
From terracotta. You
Yeah,
just put them on your computer and
yeah, they're
they're
on
just,
my computer, and then I'm able to bring them in by adding them as a layer using this tool called File Place Embedded. And they're just brought in as another layer that I can
okay,
play
so
with
you don't
here.
have them in a file in the actual Photoshop program.
Right. Yeah. No, I haven't embedded them in. Some other things I do, but I tend not to. I don't have them in this version. But for the guides, for example, with the guide layouts, I have some saved ones for some odd dimensions. And so, in addition to Richard's set of armatures, I've got the equivalents for grids as well. So I created the grids once, and then I reused them again and again over time.
Okay, great. Yeah, because like the root twos and root fives, they're not regular ratios either.
Yeah, yeah. I remember I had a bunch of those. Was it last year we did that? Seems like ancient history, but um, he gave us that
It
one.
is.
He gave us that one file with all of the lines from the square all the way to the golden ratio, everything in between, to help us find an ideal crop.
I
But
think when I did a root two, the dimensions were like 15 by 21 or something.
yeah,
I had to
odd
order.
shapes, right? And most of us are buying or cutting panels or using stretcher bars that are certain lengths and widths. And I think most of us are using, if we frame our work, often the frames are standard sizes as well. So that's why I've got things set for 8 by 10s, 20 by 16s, 16 by 12s, 9 by 12s, stuff like that.
That does make it easier. Yeah, across the board. I hear you.
Yeah. Um, let's see. If you'd like, I could spend a few minutes on what I would do with the finished work that I've photographed and the things I'd have to fix, if that's of any help, any
That
use.
would be wonderful. Thank you.
Okay,
Yes, thank you.
good. Okay, well, let me just see. So I have a painting of this from 3 years ago, and I'm just going to see if I can get back to where they were. And so I remember photographing this many different ways, inside and outside, and I remember I had one that I set up at my cottage. Let's see if I'm going to drag this raw image to Photoshop. This is probably a painting I'm going to redo now that I've spent 2 years with Juliet and thinking of how she works and handling edges and light and all that stuff. But in any event, this is one of the images that my old camera came up with. Because I brought it in as a raw file, this camera raw filter opens up automatically. So it gives me a chance to, let's say, if I wanted to change the color, I shot it outside, but if I make it cooler, it's going to be way too cool. I think inside it was more like this. I may have ended up with something like this. So there's when I bring it in, let's see. In Photoshop, white balance as shot means exactly what the camera saw. so I have a chance to warm it up or cool it off. So sometimes I'll do this. I'll have my laptop open. I'll have the real painting next to me, and I'll make adjustments just so that it matches the real thing. I also have tools for photographing where you're holding up a color grid, and then inside Photoshop, I'm able to select the color profile to match that grid, and it calibrates perfectly the colors. I don't have that set up with this version of Photoshop. So I might do that. I might go to the light area. When I'm outside, I have a tendency to over expose things too brightly, so I might bring it down a bit. I must have done this on a cloudy day, so the light is pretty even, but sometimes sometimes the highlights are too strong, or often if I photograph outside, there'll be quite a haze. So I think when I shot it, it must have been like this. This is what the camera saw. I use this dehaze tool just to get rid of some of that glare up top. And I might open it up. I know the contrast is still way too much. But the first thing I need to fix is the distortion from the camera. And I think I wasn't standing back far enough, maybe 5 or 6 feet. So there's a great tool in Photoshop called Perspective Crop. And what this allows me to do is to have the image cropped to compensate for that distortion. So I just choose the 4 corners. And once I have the 4 corners, I usually zoom in so I get this perfectly parallel to the edges. And then I click OK to accept, and that's what I end up with. Now, there's more things I would do. If I was submitting this for a show somewhere, the curator of the exhibition might say, I can't post this as it is online because it's really messy, like down here. Like this wouldn't be acceptable. So I have a choice of using the crop tool to crop out the bottom here. But there are other tools that are in Photoshop that might be useful just to clean things up. So one is, what's the label here? Clone stamp tool. Now I'll show you how I use this. I'll select an area that is looking good. Let's see, I'll choose this area here. And then with the crop tool, as I run my way along here, it's going to copy whatever it sees above. And that'll help get rid of this ugly edge down here. So again, this is an option. Instead of cropping the painting further to eliminate this ugly bottom row, I might use this tool here just to run along here. The crosshairs show where it's copying from. And that's not bad. So the problem with this, as you can see, I went across way too quickly. So it's made a copy of this fold here, which doesn't look great. But let's say I want to just focus on a tiny area like this here. There's a light area of lightness here. I don't like it, so I'll just remove it. What's another example? Often when I photograph things with my iPhone, it's picking up places where the light has caught a fold in the paint or ridge or dust. So there's another tool I might use called spot healing, if I can find it here. Just a second. Might be in another location here. Oh, come on, give it to me. Where are you?
Sorry, Alan, was the last tool you use a stamp tool?
Not the stamp tool, it's called the clone tool.
Oh,
So it
thanks.
looks like a stamp, and there are
Okay.
2 settings for it. It's the clone stamp tool.
Oh,
Is it?
thank
So
you.
you're up top here, you've got the options. You can define how large that area will be. Oh, and another important thing is you can control the opacity of it as well. That's a really cool thing. Let's see. Let's say, well, you know how in our classes we're always being told to to soften edges around things. So the something like the clone tool can be really useful, or the brush tool, because you can change the opacity to, let's say, 50%. So if I wanted to bring some of the background into the hair and the head, what I could do is, let's say, select the background above the head, and then I could kind of run this over, and there's some of the background that's now being brushed over the top of the head. Just as an example, it's a really useful tool. So when I adjusted the oh, here we go. This healing brush tool is spot healing. Yeah. So I'm in an area where you've got various tools. We're just dealing with small things. So an example would be, oh, there's lots of dust. Yeah, there's lots of dust in the t-shirt there. So I'm going to zoom in to, let's say, 120%. So you notice as I zoom in, you can see some of the spots. These are probably spots on the painting itself, not my lens, that were picked up. So I want to get rid of these. So one of the tools, the spot healing tool, is fantastic for that. There's a default setting called content aware. So it's supposed to be thinking about everything around that spot. And all I have to do is just click on the spot and it disappears, which is great. So I use this quite often, just when I'm about to post something online. So I know this is a definite ridge underneath this palette, so I can click the spot healing tool and it disappears. If I need to do a wider area, there's a version of this called the healing brush tool. And I can change it from a spot to a larger area. And let's see, I can determine how hard that will be. So where I might use this would be, let's say, well, I don't know, let's say, let's say there's an area here. It looks like a vein I was trying to paint, but it's a bit too obvious, and I want to just tone that down a bit. So I'm going to do a spot healing tool. I'm going to go over this, and it's supposed to be picking up the area left, right, top, and bottom around this spot. So if I just brush over it, it's supposed to be doing things so that that mark is less obvious. Here's another area. And as you can see, it's kind of a decent blurring tool as well. Let's see. Often these things are needed most in the faces. So here's some kind of speck showing up around his nose, under the neck. Oh, there's something else I was going to show you too. Might save that for another time. Where they have tools, filters for fixing faces. Believe it or not, they're called smart filters for. Let's see, where are we here? They're called neural filters, and there's one for portraiture. You can remove blemishes in a face. In fact, the very first example they give you here, skin smoothing. So here's the before, here's the after. I really wish I had this as a teenager because my skin was awful. And there are various versions of this, but it allows you to select a face or an area of a face, and it'll smooth things out to take away some of the blemishes, which might be flattering if you're painting someone's portrait. Let's see, I think that's all I had in store here for you. Let's see if there's anything else on my list. Oh, I know. Sorry, I forgot something important. Sorry, let me go back. Let me just bring up another. I was saying earlier that I like to produce a range of images to deal with cases where things are not as clear as they should have been. So I'll produce a version that's overexposed, one that's underexposed. Let me just try this again. Okay. Lots of memory issues here. Okay. Just a second. Don't accept. Okay, turning that off. Close that. Okay, this is a good example. I'll just start with the basic image that we had. This was the one where we applied the Leonardo. So let's work with Leonardo for a second. Let's say we were trying to figure out what's going on in the shadows. So one thing I might do would be to add an adjustment layer to change the brightness and contrast. And I know I could apply this to a selection or the whole thing, but let me just do this quickly. See how I've made it so much brighter, and I can now figure out what's going on in the shadows. So this might be a case where I would export a version that's overexposed. But the reverse might be true, where I need to see what's going on, let's say in the face there, because let's see, because it's overexposed, or the highlights are too strong. So let me just see. Zooming in on the face. Our artificial intelligence engine came up with this face that's not overexposed, but if it were, you could create a version that's darker just to see where things are. And I know when we were working with Patty's images, this is the exact kind of thing I did. If you bear with me a moment, I'm just going to jump to some of the projects that we were working on with Patty. I'm just going to try and find some of the images. So I know that when we were doing the flesh balls and the working with those different images, I was creating different versions because I was trying to see things a little bit better. Just a moment, where are they? Just a look. Okay, yeah, here we go. Let me share my screen again, and I'll just show you what I mean. Okay. So let's go to Patty's, some of the images that she gave us. Okay, let's see. So this is the original. And do you remember the exercise was to take her mapping of planes and then try and create her own poster study with the planes? So
Yes.
I was having trouble kind of reading the boundaries of where one stopped and the other began. So I created in Photoshop another version where I reduced the highlights. I added some of the, I added more clarity, and I added some more textures just so I could see what was really going on. So to me, that would be an example where, and it's useful having Photoshop just to make some adjustments to those images. And then of course you'd have your, whoops, I chose the same one. I've got two originals here, just a second, because I went back. Oh yeah, so I think I can cycle through these. So this was the black and white version of her original. This was after I applied, I reduced the highlights, I applied some clarity and some texture to come up with this. This was the original color, and then that's the refined version. So I just thought if I were painting this fellow's portrait, I would find this kind of useful to see, especially if I wanted to add some texture to the face as well. Oh. Is there anything else I can show you while I'm here? We can always do this another time.
Thanks so much, Alan. That
You're
was so helpful.
welcome.
Wow, Alan, it's a lot to take in.
It is.
I'm gonna look at it again, but it's so helpful to be able, and I think just Richard touching on it and then us watching this video today makes you really recognize how much you can do and how helpful it is in painting. I was resisting it, and just like I did charcoal, I resisted charcoal, and charcoal's not hard now. So thank you for this
You're very welcome.
fantastic. I'm sending the love from Mississippi. Thank you
You're very welcome.
so much.
It's
Yeah,
an
that was-
amazing tool. There is quite a steep learning curve, and I might know maybe 5% of the program. But there are things that I really target myself on to learn to do well that I need. And I talked about how I use it before I start painting and how I use it after, but in between, it's incredibly useful. You know how Juliet and Richard do critiques where they show our work in progress and then the original reference, and you see them side by side. Sometimes it's an absolute shock because you can't believe you made those awful drawing errors. Well, this Photoshop is great for that because you can bring your current work and the original together side by side, and just having that ability to go back and forth is incredibly useful. So I use it all the time.
That's a great suggestion, because I could do that on my iPad with, I don't have Photoshop. I have, what's
It's
the other-
Procreate is the,
Procreate.
yeah.
That's what I have. And so I could do that on Procreate really.
Oh, sorry. I hope we haven't lost you there. Oh, sorry. I lost my connection for a moment there. Oops.
Just thing. And then, like you said, if you could just put them together and look at them, that's very helpful.
Yes.
I can't tell you how many times I did exactly what you said.
You can also use it to turn it upside down,
Yes.
which is also
that's right.
when looking at shapes and shadow boundaries and edges and things like that. And I think the most wonderful thing, Alan, is that you've really expanded the possibilities of what's there for us to get in there. I feel more confident just getting into Photoshop and playing and exploring now, having watched you, in all of the incredible ways that you're able to use this to your advantage. So I can't thank you enough. I'm just
You're
blown
welcome.
away by how much you prepared and the time that you took to put this together for us. I mean, really, we're so blessed to have you, and I just really appreciate all you've done in your time.
You're very, very welcome. You're very welcome. And you're right. You can rotate things. If you know how we were taught that black mirror rule, or the tool you can take your iPad and put up to your forehead and look up and see everything with simpler values. All of that you can do in Photoshop as well. Then you have a permanent image as a reference that you can go back to. So as you're right, you can rotate the image, flip it upside down. That blur tool I showed you can remove a lot of the detail. You've got the posterize option to simplify things even further. And just like with Juliet's Procreate tool on her iPad, you can paint over things really quickly and just, it's like, what if you're asking yourself, should I darken the background, and you don't have time for color poster study, you can just go into Photoshop, pick a color, choose a brush, and just try it out. So it's a great tool.
Amazing.
Thank you, Alan,
You're
so
very
much.
welcome.
Happy
So-
Valentine's Day.
And to you too. To you too. I will stop recording now. I'll save the recording. I'll post it somewhere. Usually there's an account I have with YouTube, and I can set that up as a private file. And if I give you the link, you should be able to see the video. And I guess that's
Thanks
it.
so
We can-
much.
we can do this
So
again.
nice to see everybody.
You too, Blair.
To see
Yeah,
you.
I miss you
Oh
all.
my goodness,
Yeah.
hugs to you.
I'm still painting and everything. It's just I'm living vicariously
Mm.
through you and what you post on WhatsApp. But